After the end of monarchy in Rome, there was a crisis that Livy describes, and this crisis was created by moneylenders, and the crisis almost became the end of Rome. I welcome you to my YouTube channel where I explore ancient texts, and ancient texts here I mean texts that have been around for thousands of years. At the moment I'm going through the book From the Founding of the City by Titus Livius. It's a collection of books actually that were written about 2000 years ago, and they cover the history of Rome from its founding in around 730 BCE to around 0 AD when Augustus was the emperor of Rome. If you've not subscribed, subscribe so that you don't miss any of the videos that I upload. Now, Livy describes a crisis that went on for close to 5 years, and the source of this crisis was moneylenders in Rome. When reports came to Rome that Lucius Tarquinius Superbus was dead, there were celebrations, of course. Both the common people and the patricians celebrated. But what the common people didn't know is that this was the beginning of a new era where they will find themselves to be very taken advantage of by the patricians. With the death of the previous king, seems like the patricians felt like they no longer had a threat, or there was no threat to their security, and they didn't really need the common people, the plebeians, on their side. And now from that point on, the only way they needed the plebeians was to take advantage of economically. And what they did was to lend them money at very high interest rates. Livy states that the plebeians started to complain that while fighting as soldiers for liberty and empire, that's Rome, they were oppressed and enslaved by their fellow citizens at home, the patricians and moneylenders, the creditors. It seemed as though their freedom was more secure in war than in peace, and they were safer amongst the enemy than their own people. It had reached a point where the people felt like they were now slaves, basically, that is the plebeians, the ordinary people, and they felt like they were more better off during the war times than during the peace, because during peaceful times, they were slaves of the patricians and the moneylenders. The condition of one individual kind of triggered everything that happened later, or the actual crisis itself. And this is one individual who one day just appeared at the public square, where like the people used to meet and have conversation. This old man comes to this public square, and he's in a very terrible situation. He wore torn clothes. Livy tells us that they were filthy clothes. He looked emaciated, and he generally looked like a savage, like he looked so bad. And people recognized him, and they recognized him as a guy who used to be a military commander actually, and he was very successful, very competent. He did very good things during the wars, especially with the Latins, and he was celebrated during that time. But everybody was surprised to see him in the situation he was in. He comes and they ask him what happened, and he ended up explaining to them how he found himself in this situation where he was this emaciated, dressed in very dirty clothes, looking like a savage basically. And he tells them that he served during the Sabine War and the Latin War, or the wars against the Sabines and the Latins. And he says during the war with the Sabines, he had lost his land produce because the Sabines had come in onto the Roman territory, and they destroyed crops and took away cattle or animals from the farms that were around Rome, lands that were owned by Romans actually. And his land was among those that were raided by the Sabines. And the Sabines ended up taking away his animals, but also ended up destroying everything that was growing on the farm. And he tells them that despite the loss he had incurred because of the war, of course, the state demanded that he pays a tax, a very huge tax, a war tax, they call it. Livy described this as a war tax. And this tax, he had to borrow to pay this tax. And he had to borrow from the moneylenders, of course. And the moneylenders charged very high interest rates. And over time, the debt had grown because of the high interest rate, and it reached a point where he could not repay. And what happened at that point is that the moneylenders took away his farm, but still he owed the moneylenders more. Because of that, the moneylender took him in and made him a slave. And Livy says that this individual tells the people that he was taken to work in an underground workshop. And he also shows them his back because he had so many scars. And he told them that the scars came from the beating he received from the moneylender, who was basically his master at that point. This story ignited anger in people who were around. And people started protesting, in fact, and other people heard about this protest at the public square, and more people came. And in fact, more people who had been enslaved because of debt came and joined this protest. And at some point, the senators were afraid that they were going to be attacked. That's what Livy describes or tells us. The people started demanding that the Senate have a sitting to discuss this issue, and the senators did not do it immediately. And Livy tells us that is because at some point they feared that they were going to be attacked if they showed up at the Senate house. But as things were going, they realized that the only thing they needed to do to bring back order in the city was to meet, because that's what the people were demanding. And they come to the Senate house and they meet and they start discussing what needed to be done about this. But almost immediately there was a deadlock. The Senate was divided as far as what was supposed to be done about this issue of the debt. Seemed like almost everybody recognized that there was a problem with the debt. There were so many people who had been enslaved because they could not pay back their debt. Livy says that the moneylenders had a lot of influence on the Senate. And because of that influence, it was so difficult for the Senate to do anything really. So when the Senate meets, there is this deadlock because there is a lot of influence from the moneylenders for them not to do anything that will make them not get their money back that they were owed by the people out there, the common people. The deadlock was between two groups. The one faction was led by Consul Appius Claudius. Now, Appius Claudius is a very interesting character. In fact, his actual name used to be Autius Clausius. And this guy came from the Sabines. When the Sabines were planning to fight the Romans, he is among the few Sabines who did not like that. And in fact, he disagreed with the other Sabines and he came to Rome. And he came to Rome and he was made a citizen, and not long after that he was made a senator, in fact. And in fact he did serve as a consul. Now at this point he is a consul and he leads this faction of the Senate, and this faction of the Senate advocated for the use of force to bring order into the city. The Appius was of the opinion that the Senate or the consuls should go out there and arrest those people who were instigating these protests. And he thought that if that was done, then everybody else will go back home, and those who have debts will go and continue working as slaves and pay back whatever they owed. The other faction was led by Consul Servilius. Now, Servilius was more sympathetic to the ordinary people. And Servilius tells the Senate that this is what Livy says. The latter faction was more inclined to gentle measures and thought that when men's passions are aroused, it was safer and easier to bend them than to break them. The way Livy describes it, Servilius was more sympathetic. But when you read again, it's not like he was really sympathetic. He was more, he believed in using tactics that will make the people think that their issues are being taken care of. And in fact, as we go along, you will see how that plays out, and his plan works that way. He promises the people, but he doesn't deliver. But as the Senate is discussing this issue of the debt, reports come that the Volscians were coming to attack Rome. The Volscians was this tribe that were neighbors to the Romans. And the Volscians are marching on Rome. And the Senate now cannot discuss this issue of the debt because there is an emergency that is taking place at the moment. But at the same time, the plebeians, the ordinary people, hear about this report and they are like, they like it. They are happy about it. Why? Because they are like, it was, in fact, Livy says that they saw it as a divine retribution on the patricians. And they say that the gods were preparing to avenge the tyranny of the patricians. They encouraged one another not to sign up for the military service because they had that the Volscians are coming. They thought it was an opportunity to kind of like blackmail the Senate and the patricians to do whatever they wanted them to do. They told them, we are not going to sign up for the military to defend the city from the attack by the Volscians. And in fact, Livy says that the reason that it was better for all of them to die together in an invasion than to perish one by one in the hands of moneylenders and the patricians. So that's how the plebeians saw it. Livy quotes them stating, let the patricians take up arms, let the patricians serve as the common soldiers, that those who get the spoils of war may share its peril. So they're like, we don't have anything to lose really, we're already slaves here, and these people expect us to pay a lot of money to them, and they want us to work for that. Basically, we are working free for them. we don't care really if the Volscians come and attack the city. If they kill us, it's not a big deal. We are dying anyways. And when the Senate heard this, the Senate was alarmed, of course, because that meant that there was no one to defend the city from the attack of the Volscians. Now, faced with this situation, the Senate sent Servilius because they understood that Servilius was more liked by the people than most of the other senators and the other consuls. Servilius was a co-consul of Appius, so they knew that he was better to talk to the plebs and try to persuade them to join the army and defend the city. And Servilius did go and address the plebs at the public assembly. He told them that the Senate was in the middle of discussing their issue of debt, but because the Volscians were marching on Rome, they could not continue with that debate. He then, this is where he tricks the people, he issues an edict. He's a consul, he's a co-consul of Appius, and he says, this is what Livy says, no one could keep a Roman citizen in chains or duress so that he will prevent them from enrolling in military service. Also, none will seize or sell the goods or detain a member of the family of a soldier as long as he was in a military camp. Now, when you explore this edict, it didn't really give the people anything. It was trickery because it basically told them, if you want to be protected from your creditor, then sign up for the military. That was basically saying. And the people thought that they had achieved something or they had been given something, and they signed up for the military. Now, by the time the Volscians arrived, Rome had put its house in order. The Volscians had been told that there was a strife in Rome, and they were expecting some Romans to kind of join them. But by the time they arrived in Rome, or near Rome, the Romans had solved that problem, and the ordinary people had joined the army, and the army was in standby waiting to protect the city. The battle was fought, and indeed the Romans won. The Volscians were pushed away, and in fact the Romans went into another war with Sabines, and they defeated them as well. After these wars had ended, the people now expected that whatever had been promised by Servilius was going to stand, like their debts will be forgiven and they will start afresh. But once the wars were ended, nothing was happening at the Senate, because they were expecting the Senate to kind of like make this a law or pass some decisions that will make it official that these people are not going to be chased around for the debts they were owing. But the war is over, and the Senate does nothing. The Senate is silent, and in fact, the moneylenders started going after the people who owed them their money, and they started taking them to the consul, and in particular, they started taking them to Appius. Now, Appius Claudius, I told you before that he came from the Sabines, and he was made a citizen, and then he was made a senator, and then a consul. Livy describes him as someone who hated the plebs with passion. The moneylenders knew that he was more on their side than Servilius was, and they were taking their cases to Appius. And Appius was ruling in their favor and passing judgments that made more people slaves because of the debt they owed. The people tried to go to Servilius. They asked him to intervene, and they remind him of his promise, the promise he had made before they signed up to go fight the Volscians. And he told them there was nothing he could do, because his co-consul, that is Appius, and the Senate and the nobility in general was not interested in solving that problem. So he kind of told them that he was helpless himself. There was nothing he could do to help them. Now, at that point, the people are frustrated, of course. And they decide to take matters into their own hands. And this is what they do. They started protecting one another from authority. If a judgment was passed to come and arrest someone because they owed a debt, the people ganged up and protected them from being taken. And they started operating that way. And soon, the moneylenders could not get their money back, because even when they get a favorable ruling from the consul or from wherever, they could not have it effected. The people would protect the other people from paying, from being taken into slavery and things like that. And this became now a source of anxiety for the patricians. Things were going in the direction they didn't expect things to go. Now, the Senate tried everything to bring order, to make sure that judgments are followed and people are paying back their money to people they owe the money. But nothing was working. They decided to have a sitting to solve this problem once and for all. And during the conversation they were having at the Senate, 3 proposals were made. The first proposal was made by Valerius, P. Valerius. And Valerius proposed that the people who had been promised that their debt would be forgiven so that they joined the army should be forgiven for that they shouldn't pay back. but everybody else should be ignored and they should pay back. Titus Livius proposed that there should be a universal relief of all debtors, that everybody should be forgiven for their debt. Let's start afresh. On his part, Appius Claudius, as I've said, he had a lot of hate for the common people. He proposed something else. He told the Senate that the issue was not the debt, but simply bad behavior by the plebs. And according to him, the root cause of this problem was that everybody who was arrested because they instigated violence in the city could appeal to the public, because the public served as the topmost court. So if you are arrested, the public in a public assembly could just decide that you go free. And so he says because of that people will instigate violence, and then when they are arrested and they need to be punished, they appeal to their fellow plebs, and then they get away with that. And he said that was the root cause of the chaos that Rome was facing. Livy quote Appius Claudius saying the following: "Come, let's create a dictator from whom there is no appeal. Then this madness which is setting everything on fire will soon die down. Let me see anyone strike a lictor when he knows that his back and even his life are in the sole power of the man whose authority he attacks." Now he says this is one of those special moments that Rome needs a dictator. And dictators used to be appointed when Rome was facing a huge crisis. And Appius thought that this was such a moment that they needed a dictator. And in fact, he was almost elected to be the dictator, but other senators decided against it, and they thought they should find somebody who is more, not a radical like Appius Claudius. They elected M. Valerius to be the dictator. And M. Valerius was now in power, and he needed to solve this problem once and for all. But turns out M. Valerius was sympathetic to the people. He didn't want to go so hard on the people. Before he could take steps to solve this problem, there was war with some neighbors. The people joined the army because they trusted M. Valerius, and they protected Rome from the attack from outside. Now, when the wars were over, M. Valerius kind of betrayed the other patricians because he brought a law into the Senate that would basically forgive everyone their debt. And this is the opposite of what most of the people in the Senate and the patricians wanted. And so they defeated that motion. And after defeating that motion, this is what Valerius says as he addresses the Senate. He says, "I'm not acceptable as an advocate of concord. Depend upon it, you will very soon wish that the Roman plebs had champions like me. As far as I'm concerned, I will no longer encourage my fellow citizen in vain hopes, nor will I be a dictator in vain. Internal decisions and foreign wars have made this office necessary to the Commonwealth. Peace has now been secured abroad. At home, it is made impossible. I would rather be involved in the revolution as a private citizen than a dictator." And he resigned. After giving this speech to the Senate, he resigns from being a dictator. Now, with that resignation of the dictator, the people, of course, knew that he was on their side. And the people, at the same time, realized that their problem was not being solved, because the person who would have done it was not able to do it even though he had the powers of a dictator. Now the people decided to do things their own way again. And initially, Livy tells us, initially they had considered to murder the consuls and some of the patricians and also the moneylenders. But after considering that option for a moment, they realized they couldn't do it because of religious reasons. And so they decided to take a step that was unimaginable. They decided to leave the city. So they organized themselves and they left the city. And Livy tells us that the commoners went about 3 miles away and they founded a camp and they started living there. Seems like part of their plan was, or one of the options they had was to turn that into a new city, a competitor of Rome in fact. And the patricians who were left in the city started getting worried, because now it meant they were vulnerable, not only to these people who had left the city, the commoners, because they could easily come back and fight them or eliminate them, but also from other towns and other cities and other kingdoms who could now easily come and take over Rome because there was no one to protect it. Livy quotes some of the patricians saying the following: "How long will the multitude who had seceded remain quiet? What will happen if a foreign war broke out in the meantime?" So they were worried about their safety and the safety of the city not only from the plebs who had left the city, but also from others who might take advantage. So the Senate decided to do something about it, and they sent a guy by the name Menenius Agrippa to go and negotiate with the people. They chose Menenius, one, because he was very eloquent, and two, because he himself had come from plebs. He was a plebeian, his origins. His parents were plebeians, or his grandparents were plebeians. So he had that connection with the people. But he was no longer a plebeian, really, because he was now a senator. So, but they sent him, he goes, and the people welcome him at the camp. The people welcome him, and he addresses them, and they listen to them, and he gives them this fable. In the days when all parts of the human body were not as now agreeing together, but each member took its own course and spoke its own speech, the other members, indignant at seeing that everything acquired by their care and labor and ministry went to the belly, whilst it, undisturbed in the middle of them, did nothing but enjoy the pleasures provided for it, entered into conspiracy. The hands were not to bring food to the mouth was not to accept it when offered, and the teeth was not to masticate it. Whilst in their resentment, they were anxious to coerce the belly by starving it. The members themselves wasted away, and the whole body was reduced to the last stage of exhaustion. Then it became evident that the belly rendered no idle service, and the nourishment it received was not greater than that which it bestowed by retarding to all parts of the body this blood by which we live and are strong, equally distributed into the veins, after being matured by the digestion of the food. So he basically uses the body as an analogy of what Rome is. He sees Rome as one body and has different parts. It has the patricians, it has the consuls, it has the lictors, let's say police, it has the people, it has everybody, and everybody plays a role. And he tells them leaving the city is like the other parts of the body deciding to starve the stomach because they think the stomach is taking everything. What they don't realize is what the other parts of the bodies might not realize is by starving the body, they end up starving themselves. So he was basically telling them by trying to starve the patricians, they were basically starving Rome, and that will end up harming even them. People were persuaded by that fable, and they agreed to negotiate. And the negotiations led to reconciliation. And out of the negotiations, the plebs were allowed to elect their own magistrates. And these were called the tribunes of the people. And these people had a lot of powers, and they will take care of the needs of their own people so that they are not taken advantage of by the patricians or by the nobility. And these positions remained in place for a very long time. Now, first tribunes of the people were C. Licinius and L. Albinus. And these chose 3 others who joined them, so that they were 5. And it is agreed that Sicinius, who had been the main instigator of the secession, was amongst them. With that done, the long-standing crisis were kind of like resolved. Livy, at this point, does not tell us how the question of debt and interest rate was fixed.